Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Matza. I'm the Speaker's Chair for the Association of Corporate Treasurers, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to this session entitled What's Next for Your TMS during our Festival of Treasury Transformation, which is happening all week. A little bit of housekeeping before we start, if I may. Of course, you've been able to download the app for the Festival of Treasury Transformation. And on the app, there's a whole host of information, including bios, agendas for each session, Q&A opportunities, feedback opportunities as well. All of those things are important to us, particularly the Q&A during each session as you listen, and then the feedback on each session, which helps us to plan both for digital and live events, which hopefully we'll be getting back to at some point in the not too distant future. Session is recorded, so will then be available on the website for you to be able to go back and or to persuade colleagues to listen to at their convenience. Obviously, there's a whole range of topics being covered during the festival, as there were during the International Treasury Week back in May. You can see from the agendas on each individual day, so today, Monday, through to Thursday, what's going to be covered. Some are pre-recorded, and some, like this one, are going to be live during the day. Hence, your questions, we will try and get to them as they appear during the session. But obviously, if we don't get to all of them, I'm sorry for that. But I'm sure that we'll be able to have another opportunity, again, in the not too distant future, to address some of those. I'd like to welcome my speakers today, and as is my customary wont, I will ask them to introduce themselves and describe who they are and their organizations when we start off with the various questions that we have. They cover a wide range of knowledge and disciplines, both as consultants, treasury practitioners, working for the ACT in Naresh's case, and obviously working for a provider in Ben's case. So we hope we'll be able to cover the waterfront for you in terms of knowledge and expertise. And again, as a reminder, please do let me have your Q&A, your Q, and we'll hopefully get to the A as the sessions progress. So, to the topic, what's next for the TMS? We've covered a variety of technology subjects, both in the International Treasury Week, and we'll be covering one or two more during this festival week as well. But in reality, it covers a wide range of ground in terms of what people mean by a treasury management system, what they use it for, what they invest in it, how they manage it, and so on. What I'd like to do is start off, however, by just getting a general sense from each of my speakers what they think treasury management system means for the corporate treasury and for corporate treasurers, and to see where they fit into that general picture. So I'd like to ask James Kelly, first of all, to lead us off. James.
Hi, so I'm James Kelly. I'm Group Treasurer at Pearson PLC. So we're the largest private education company in the world. I've been a user of a TMS for sort of 15 years or so. Bizarrely, largely the same one, despite being at a number of different corporates. And the Treasury system provides a kind of a safeguard around, that having the right level of controls, having automated accounting, and ensures that the kind of the mainstream treasury operations, so FX and money market deposits, etc., go through without a hitch. And over the years, we've seen that technology improve, and as we've integrated with Swift, developed more and more straight through processing. And so now with electronic trading through to automated settlement, the kind of the main highway of the treasury network can be dealt with through a variety of treasury systems pretty efficiently. As the business of treasury looks also at risk management, I think the transactional side has been dealt with pretty well. I think on the risk management side, there's a little bit more work to do for many providers, and I'm sure that we'll talk about that as we go.
We'll come to that. Thanks very much for those opening remarks, James. Ben, from your perspective as a technology provider, what do you think TMS means, and what do you think it means to your clients?
Yeah, sure. And hi, everyone. I'm Ben. I sort of head up the acquisition globally of new clients at TreasuryXpress. And as you can, hopefully, we're a provider of treasury management software. We have a few offices dotted around the world as well. In terms of kind of my view of and how our clients use our treasury management system and what we see is, mainly it's very much a central place to access all their information accurately as well. It's obviously a time-saving instrument, and as James mentioned as well, sort of an internal controls process. I think those are the main things that we see our clients wanting from us, especially in the current state at the moment. I think a view over their liquidity and their balances at their bank accounts are of particular focus, as well as sort of the forecasting piece. And what we are seeing more and more and more at the moment is, people requiring a kind of central system, with everyone being working from home, a central system where they can go to one place and access everything safely and securely as well. So that's what we're seeing sort of historically, and also sort of at the moment with the current situation.
Thank you, Ben. We'll come back to one of those points, of course, as we go through. Now, Chris, you're in a slightly different position to some of us here. You've been both a consultant in this business, but also you've been a treasurer yourself in creating treasuries from scratch in a number of businesses. What does a TMS mean for you in perhaps one or two of those particular scenarios?
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter, for having me here. It's always good to be at these sessions of the ACT. My name is Chris van Dijl. As Peter already said, I used to be a group treasurer, lived in many parts of the world, and about 6 years ago, I decided to set up Cugavadi to provide treasury consultancy and treasury training, and to assist all the treasurers to take that treasury really to the next level. And in my career as a treasurer, I've used a variety of treasury systems. I've seen probably all of them in real life. And as well as a consultant, what you see is that really, once you have a treasury system, you come from an Excel environment. So yes, the treasury system is very much there to create a central database, to make sure you have all the information in one place, but it's integrated. You can have all your information all on nice little Excel spreadsheets, but it's not very integrated. And I think that's integration. That's really creating the major benefit. Knowledge is power. And I think if you have that knowledge readily available, that's really what helps organizations to drive their treasury forward.
Thank you, Chris. I mean, we've laid out some basic principles there, and that's extremely useful. Before I ask our last contributor, Naresh, to come in, I'd like to be able to set up a live poll for you to start with, which you'll be able to access through the app. So hopefully the clever tech guys will be getting that poll ready while I introduce Naresh. And as you can see it now on your screen, if you'd like to open your app and give us some answers to those questions, that would be extremely helpful. Naresh, sitting in the ACT as you do, but in your previous career as well, working in corporate treasury, what's your perspective on where the TMS business is at the moment and what it means for treasurers?
Thanks, Peter. And yes, it's, I think echoing what we've heard already, I think it is a really useful source of the truth, data all in one place. I think the thing I find quite surprising, especially having been a consultant with PwC for about 9 years, is that a lot of organizations still use Excel for a lot of the data analysis. And I think it's a real shame, because these tools are really powerful. And we can maybe explore a bit later today why that's the case. But I think, A, it is a good source of data. If the data is good coming in, then obviously it's good coming out. And it is used to create and manipulate and provide a lot of information to management. But I see a lot of it done outside of the system.
Okay, that's very helpful, Naresh, and that's a good introduction from everybody, so thank you all very much. I see the answers building up on the poll questions. The leader at the moment is people are still going ahead with their pre-COVID plans in terms of treasury investment. And we certainly saw some of that in the business of Treasury research that was conducted earlier this year, pre the broad pandemic that we're currently experiencing, suggesting that people were still certainly looking at their tech investment in Treasury, in particular in areas such as cyber investment, amongst others. The preponderance of the answers here seems to be they're going ahead with it. Some plans have been paused, some are researching, looking at a new system, so there's a mix there. Very few have no current plans for Treasury tech investment, which I think is probably a good thing, but clearly it is going to take us into one or two areas in terms of how we construct business cases and so on. James, if I can come back to you, we've heard therefore that what we've got here is, if you like, some base tech that allows us to consolidate information, to enable us to manage that consolidated information. But to move the debate on, question I'd like to ask you, and maybe then the others will come in on this, do you see TMS really as only as an operational tool, or do you see it going further in terms of potentially having value for more risk-oriented and even strategic-oriented Treasury activity?
So I think it absolutely can be. And I think to Naresh's point, the reason why a lot of treasurers don't use it for the kind of risk-orientated pieces and the scenario modeling is often around the way that the database is configured. So a lot of reports are point-in-time reports. So they'll tell you that, as at today or as at a week ago, you had counterparty breaches on the following bank accounts, or these were your balances. What's much harder to do in a lot of treasury systems is that kind of forward-looking holistic piece. A lot of them are configured to do that on cash forecasts, but for example, they won't give you a risk-weighted forecast, value derivatives forward, that kind of thing, with the ease that you can get with things like Excel. And so I think there's a piece around enhancing the reporting and also enhancing some of the integration. I think the other thing is that, certainly in my career, I found that more and more I've had to work with the lovely accountants. And so when I talk treasury, I have to talk in terms of what does that mean at, the next half year or year end, and be able to kind of give a, point in time balance sheet or a cash flow statement 6 months in advance. And generally speaking, that's difficult to configure in a treasury system, because often, for example, you might have your treasury positions, but then you've got dividends payable, all the operating cash flows and things. So you're pulling data from a variety of different sources. And so I think the advent of APIs and things like that give a great opportunity for the database that's the TMS and the database that's the ERP to start to talk together, so that you can move all that data into an aggregator, whether it's Tableau or whether it's another reporting tool, so that you can really start to flex that. Because I think that all the raw materials are there, but my experience has been that a lot of TMS providers perhaps haven't advanced some areas of the offering as much as others. So when I talk to our current providers, understandably, there's a big push around making sure that they're ready for LIBOR reform, and there's only so much bandwidth in a lot of these software houses. So it's one of those things that that will be very important. It'll affect almost every corporate up and down the land who's got any kind of floating rate loan, but it means that other pieces around reporting and other things aren't yet happening. But I think we're not a million miles off, and there are lots of very good pieces about the treasury systems, particularly the levels of automation that you can create. But actually that database extraction, because of the way that they've been built incrementally, often you find that there isn't that kind of helicopter view out of how do I take all of this data from the database and use that holistically to produce the kind of charts that really do drive insights.
Let me ask a question that we are going to come back to later, but it's useful while you're on that we get your opinion on this. It strikes me here that there's a little bit of a chicken and egg in the sense that is it the lack of data processing that's holding treasurers back from being more strategic, or is it the fact that treasurers themselves are not being more strategic and therefore demanding more in terms of their data analysis and management?
I think it's a bit of both. I think part of it is the way that we interact, and actually this is the kind of area where things like the ACT can be really helpful, because actually the TMS providers will listen to this, they'll read polls in the Treasury magazine, etc. Us all individually asking for what we think is achievable is only going to move the dial a little bit. There are a few corporates around the country, that the likes of Vodafone, who could probably demand things and they'll happen. For most of us, it's a case of banding together and demonstrating that there's demand. And so, I think it's one of those things that I was on a call last week, and one of the Treasury people at Cisco talked about how they'd aggregated all their banking information, so that they risk weighted their bank accounts, which I thought was a really nice idea. So they looked at how many signatories were on each bank account. Did they have central SWIFT access? Was there local bank account access? Who were the local signatories? Could payments be made from it? To take all of those pieces to give a risk weighting, and then over time kind of show how those risk weightings change. At the moment we can do each of those, but pulling all of that together into a grid and then having a weighting at the end, you could probably do about 65% of it, and then you end up doing the last bit in Excel. So there's some really nice little value added pieces, because people love what can you show your CFO, but the reality is that the CFO doesn't want a dashboard every 3 seconds, but they do want to know what the kind of the big picture risks are.
Ben, just to follow up with you, do you think you and your peers in the provider world, perhaps I'm going to be a bit harsh here, but I'm going to do it anyway, bear a little bit of responsibility for this chicken and egg dilemma? Do you think you're making it too easy for people to sort of go for the easy wins rather than look at the long-term benefits of some of the data management that enables better strategic decisions to be made? Where do you see both just yourself, but also the industry as a whole?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think it's easy wins, I suppose, are what is easy to put on a sort of return on investment or a business case analysis. Centralizing bank account information to sort of avoid errors or to save time. That can be shown in terms of time saving, return, FTE saving. That can be shown on a return on investment. It may be a short-term quick win, but those quick wins, they do tend to kind of get business cases approved. We see it as kind of an overall approach. We try and be sort of as holistic as possible and say, well, what do you want to achieve in the short term? How can we help with that? And how can that demonstrate a return on investment with a system? But also, let's look a bit more forward. And I know from TreasuryXpress, we break our projects down into sort of phased projects, really, where we look at those short-term wins, we assess what they might sort of bring to the business, and then get those done as a priority to sort of deliver to the business and show that this system, is going to actually improve people's working lives. And then, people are more in tune and using the system and happy with the system, then we can look at other areas such as payment or risk management. But
that takes me, just to interrupt you there for a minute, that takes me on to a question that's come in here that sort of goes to this point a little bit, and maybe this is the time to address it. Are indeed TMS is the answer, or is the future going to be a wider selection of smaller, more specialized tech providers, with each providing specific solutions instead of one comprehensive system? I'm going to put that question to Chris and Naresh in a slightly different way. But from your point of view, Ben, what do you think? Where do you think that's likely to go, and what do you think the impact of that would be?
Yeah, I think it's an important point. I think there's a lot of systems that are sprouting up, that might focus on forecasting or might focus on pre-trade or post-trade risk and those sort of things. I think if treasury management providers don't become more agile and don't actually become more open to developing their own software, then they will get left behind. I think that we do have a unique benefit of being able to we have the existing knowledge to connect to banks, the in-house understanding of what Treasurer does from a wider perspective, not just a pigeonholed look at one thing, and how those things interact, I think is an important thing as well. How each area interacts to provide that sort of helicopter view at the end of the day. But I do think it's an important point. At TreasuryXpress, we try and be as flexible as possible. James mentioned sort of the LIBOR reform, we're working towards that as well. So we try and be as flexible as possible so that we don't get left behind by customers that might be looking at 3, 4, 5 systems to do what one could quite easily do if they were a bit more agile.
Thank you for that. It looks like we've reached the end of on the polling front. So thank you everybody who participated in that. Roughly on the numbers that I got here, it's about 48% are going ahead with their pre-COVID plans. 28% have paused. 20% are looking at new system, and perhaps that might mean across whether that's an individual or a bolt-on or a comprehensive system. We didn't have the opposite there. And only roughly 4% suggest they have no current plans. Chris, in your experience, particularly when you've gone into organizations that perhaps haven't had systems before, where do you think the line is drawn between achieving those easy wins, getting something in straight away, as opposed to saying, well, no, let's hold on and look at something that's rather more comprehensive, that's going to give us a much bigger picture on how our business is operating? Where do you see that? Particularly that relationship between treasurers and CFOs, and then into the C-suite?
It's a very tough line that you have to walk, because you have to at one stage you have to convince your CFO, and you can convince your CFO with the quick wins normally, but you also have to make sure that you just don't buy the system for the quick wins, because once the quick wins are done, you want to grow and do something better. So that's the really tricky bit. And I've seen companies that also done it the other way around. They wanted the full-blown system implemented immediately because they wanted it for the fancy stuff, but forgot about the implementation of the basic cash management, for example. And they had almost they did their whole cash forecasting they tried to do, but then they forgot about the connectivity to the bank and the risk management side of it. And of course, when you have a system like this, it's a full-blown system. It can do many things. And the way you set it up, you really need to think about the vision. Where do you want to be 3 years down the line, 4 or 5 years down the line with the same system? Otherwise, you come to what about 20% of the people on the poll are reached, that you're looking for another system because it's no longer fit for purpose for your organization. So it's very tricky. You see many companies, and then it's very reasonable. I think that's the right way to go for the quick wins, because you need to get the buy-in from the board. You need to get the buy-in from the business as well. You need to show it to your subsidiaries, your wider organization, that what you're trying to do as Treasury is actually providing benefit. Now you need to get buy-in, not just from the CFO, but also from the whole company or your finance managers across the globe. So the quick wins are very important. But as you said, it has to be the thing is how do we balance this? And we should not forget about the future scope.
And where would you stand on the point of whether or not you do go for a single sort of comprehensive system versus several different processes? And even then, given that you've got bank portals, or you may have SWIFT, or you may have different payment structures, particularly because of the jurisdictions you're in. I know you're working and have been for some time now in the Middle East, based out of the UAE. And where does that where do the burdens fall there in terms of, well, that system's great, but it doesn't work here, but we need something that they've got? Do you mix and match, or do you make do and then hope something a bit like Mr. McCorber, better comes along later?
Well, I think we're not there yet. I think if we will come to a kind of a Uber treasury system whereby there is an empty platform and you can, with APIs, connect everything that you want to your cash forecasting system, your advanced value at risk system you plug in, you have your Swift plugin, you have your bank account validation plugin, and you have your payments through the banks plugged in. But that system, I haven't seen it yet. Maybe one of the treasury providers will become this in the future. But I think at the moment, what you see as well, you see the banks as well trying to add to their online banking systems things like forecasting, things like supply chain finance, and they try that to try to keep their clients close to them. But I think in the long run, I think we're really going for this API solution when there will be one empty system that you buy and you can add it with apps through APIs of whichever speciality that you need.
Thank you for that. Naresh, in your experience and in your current position working in that policy technical area of the ACT, and I know you've got a particular focus and an interest in payments, just as an example, do you think that treasurers and Treasury, they're ready to develop this new technology, they're champing at the bit to put it in, or do you think that actually treasurers and Treasury teams are a little underpowered here and probably need to look at themselves, look at their teams, the skills and the capabilities they have before they can start demanding things from people who are supplying them with this type of product?
Great question. I think the one thing that's consistent around all my conversations with treasurers, and having both been a consultant but also been in treasury myself, is most treasurers are really busy just keeping the wheels turning. If there's one thing I've learned over the last sort of 2-3 months of the conversations with treasurers, is how much of their time is spent just keeping the wheels turning. LIBOR reform, if they had a choice, they wouldn't really be focusing on it at all. And I think there is a real question, if you've said, around skills and bandwidth. And I think if somebody's not completely broken, there's probably going to be a reluctance for treasurers to really try and embrace a new system. I think they'll put up, I think as treasurers, they put up with a lot of systems becoming less fit for purpose as time goes by. And it's really only when you get a new treasurer or something that clearly is not working anymore, or a CFO that is actually prepared to listen to a conversation, that's the point where I think we do see system changes. I'm a big fan personally of APIs in general. They drive a lot of the work around payments. But I do believe that one of the real issues that I've seen before is integrating a treasury system with other bits of the plumbing within an organization. And I think that, I do agree with Chris that at some point it'd be great to think about a system where you can plug and play lots of different components. But at the moment, the things that I see most successful people are where people buy almost like Treasury in a box, one solution that connects to an EMEA repository, a banking system, confirmations, etc. Because that's really what we want. We don't want to know, we don't have arguments with different technology providers. We want one person, one company that basically does it all and is responsible for making sure the payments go through, straight through, without any hitch. And if there is a hitch, I ring Ben, I give him a hard time, and I expect Ben to fix it all.
Yeah, I'm not sure I entirely believe that, quite aside from the concentration risk and the impact of others. Just one small point, though, to pick up there. In those conversations you've had over this COVID period with treasurers, with obviously wearing your ACT hat, do you sense any frustration perhaps that the tools that they've had to work with, whether self-imposed, i.e. bought themselves or implemented themselves, or ones that they've inherited in organizations, have been up to the job?
I think, again, a mixed response. I think it really depends upon the treasurer, the team, the skills that they have. I think a lot of them know they're not using the systems as fully as they could do. I've been really impressed by the conversations that I've heard with the vendors being, skilling up their help desks to try and make sure that Treasury folk are really getting the most they can out of their existing systems. So I think there will be some frustration, but I think as treasurers, we pretty brought a chunk of it upon ourselves. We haven't been as demanding and kept our own skills at the forefront of where they could be.
James, what would be your view on that? Running as you do a treasury in an established business and an established treasury where you've been for a little while now. Do you think you've got enough capability? Do you think the business has got enough capability? Where are you on that line in terms of tech talent and skill within your treasury, and therefore what you can do with the technology that you have?
So I think I'm quite fortunate. I've got a pretty tech savvy team. In particular, there are a couple in the team. Sean is probably the most obvious to call out, who really know what they're doing around a treasury system. I also have a consultant who helps us a little bit and probably does a day or two a month, and who's worked with me for a long time, so knows what I'm looking for, and helps us basically just optimize and fine tune the system so that we get what we need out of it. And as a result, it really operated very smoothly over the last few weeks. This is the biggest business interruption example that you could hypothecate, and actually it's been very smooth, really. I think in terms of, there's always a balance. You'd always like to run faster with your system improvements and your process improvements than you actually can, because there's real life and there's businesses to serve and requests and sales teams who are interested in things and all those other things. But I think I try and make sure that we have a good balance of skill sets within the team so that we can keep all parts of the boat moving forward. But it's difficult, and it does mean that we often fish in different ponds to the I speak to recruitment consultants. They'll tell me that I want an out of the box treasury analyst who's got the following profile, and the most recent hire we've made is very strong in the data analytics side. I've got a systems person, I've got someone who's very good at communicating. I try and make sure that everyone has good all-round skills and a couple of special skills that complement the needs elsewhere in the team. But it takes cultivation. It doesn't happen by accident.
Do you think, looking forward, as touch wood, everybody safely is able to come forward from this pandemic, that you will look at your treasury system in a different way than you would have done 6 or 9 months ago? And I'm thinking both the sort of operational issues, things like cyber security and so on, also resilience in terms of being able to use on a work from home or remote working basis, but also in terms of saying, well, the business and the way we do business may well change and may have changed, and therefore the way in which I evaluated the systems that I had or have looked at is going to change.
I think that it pushes some of the things that you kind of look at already. So for quite some time, for example, that using tokens to access bank accounts has felt clunky. One of the big advantages of Swift is that you stop having 10 sets of tokens in your desk and juggling is this the Bank of America one or the JP Morgan one or whatever, and handbags full of tokens. I think things like being able to do two-factor authentication over your mobile phone, all those kinds of things become really important. And I think there are a lot of systems now that you can approve payments remotely via your phone and things like that. That becomes really useful. I think as well, it's really shone a spotlight on some of the funny processes. So, I've got a letter downstairs that I've got to send off to Singapore because I've got to they need a physical signature on something. So most of the things we've been able to do kind of using virtual signatures. But again, it kind of pushes you down the route of, okay, well, how do we ease that kind of KYC process so that we can do virtual signatures? And it's been interesting to see how some of the banks have really embraced, you get an Adobe signing request or that kind of thing, and others haven't so much. So again, I think that becomes as important as the how painful are you with KYC and how many days does it take you to open a bank account.
What about issues there in relation to some of the more far-reaching issues in terms of looking at your, and I'm still using old-fashioned language here, in terms of looking at your balance sheet or your fixed floating mix or your overall maturity profile, those types of much bigger picture financial risk issues that feed into the business strategy that you have. Do you think you will look at systems in a different way to evaluate those rather than just here's how we put the building blocks in place type things?
I think if you can, I think, and this is to Ben's point, I guess, a little bit about the quick wins. One of the big problems is that if I want to get the things that the board are asking me questions about done out of a TMS, potentially I have to uproot every other process in my treasury in order to fix that one problem. And so you kind of end up with a lot of this being done out of Excel or other systems. And it's, because you end up having to use the sledgehammer to crack the nut. I think, generally speaking, I can get most of the positions out of the TMS and then feed that into other things. It's not huge changes that would make a big difference, but a lot of the ERP systems, for example, you can get an Excel integrator or you can get an API to download things into other systems. And a lot of the TMSs play really well with banks and other things, but they don't necessarily play that well with reporting tools.
Yeah. Chris, from the perspective and the experiences that you have, it's a little bit further on from that question of easy wins versus longer term. What would you say in terms of balancing that when you're going into a treasury, either as a consultant or trying to help them sort of expand or grow? Do you look first at the people? Do you look first at the processes? Do you look first at what the board needs? How do you play that game to everyone's advantage? Indeed, can you play it to everyone's advantage?
Well, it's always very difficult to keep everybody happy. So that's something that's probably the most difficult thing to do. But what I always do is whenever you go into a new company, and it doesn't matter whether you're a consultant or you're a new treasurer in a new role, is to understand what's the strategy of the company. So really, I always try to get a meeting with the CEO, with the CFO, with the chairman, depending on the kind of company, and really getting their input as well. Not just going by treasury, but really looking what does the company want, what is the long-term vision, what's the long-term vision of the CFO, CEO, or chairman, and then really roll that down into treasury and say, what do we need in treasury to really get forward to that point? So you really start looking at this future treasury operating model that you start designing, and with that you start looking at, okay, now we know where we need to get to. We also know what we need, what the low-hanging fruits are. This is the easy bits. This is the short-term goals. And with that, you start looking, do I need a system for this? If they don't have one, if they have an ERP, how much can they do in their ERP? And from there on, when you start designing the whole organization, of course, you look at the people aspect as well. Because you have persons in the treasury organization that have been working on Excel for 25 years. You probably need to upskill those employees as well to get them more tech savvy, get them interested into a TMS. And it's the whole picture that all comes together in order to try to keep everybody happy, as you said.
In your experience, would you say, A, that treasurers are capable of doing that, and B, indeed, CFOs and boards are capable of taking the point?
It depends. I mean, every company is different. Every treasurer is different. Every treasurer has a different background. Or there are an ex-accountant to CFO who moves into a treasury role. Then they might come from a funding area, or they might come from a purely cash management area. So everybody's different. I think that if you have a well-established treasurer that knows the business that he's in very well, knows the organization very well, and is tech savvy and knows what's out there from a treasury point of view, the treasurer will be able to take this forward even with his board.
All right, that's very helpful. Ben, coming back to you here and looking at it from your perspective, do you think that indeed there's a responsibility of treasury service providers such as yourselves to actually drive treasurers and treasury forward into these more strategic, more dramatic areas, for want of a better phrase, or can you only be sort of reactive to what buyers want from you? How does that play within an organization such as yourselves? In terms of development, for example, let alone what you actually have as current product.
Yeah, I think it's probably a meet in the middle scenario, to be quite honest. I think that treasurers, and we see this most of the time anyway, they will have a good understanding of what they want from a system, especially if they've gone through the sign-off process and they've done all their internal negotiations to actually approve this project. Most people will come to us with either a really in detailed RFP or just a really in detailed list of requirements. And they may have got that, through looking at their operations, considering how they might improve those, and then how that might transfer into a system. Even then, we still do see that some areas are missing. And obviously from our experience with other companies, things do relate, A plus B does equal C, and sometimes the B is missing. And we can just kind of slot that in there. So I think it's a combination of the two. It's very difficult for us to understand the business entirely because obviously we don't have an in-depth understanding like the treasurer does and like anyone working within the business does. But we can often see, well, if you're looking to do this, well, why don't you maybe think about doing this, or our tool can do this as well, and push them down that route. It's a slight, but yeah.
Do you see those conversations being different as to whether the organization is doing this work for itself, whether it's run by the treasurer, whether it's run by its own, if they have an IT team, or perhaps if they don't have that, or if they're a slightly smaller, mid-sized organization, if they're using a consultant? Do you have any particular views or indeed any particular advice that you would give in those circumstances?
Yeah, I think that depending on who is thinking these requirements up, very much on what they come up with. I think a treasurer might look very much in the short term at what they have their headaches are at the moment, and maybe not think as long term because they want to solve the short term headaches, and that is is important. But obviously, like we said, we need to look a bit more long term. A consultant might take that step back and look a bit more longer term, and IT, they might just be interested in how the banks are going to connect and how much of my time is this going to take up. So I would say advice. I would say try and just make sure that you involve everyone, but then actually look at it at the end of the day and say, well, is this feasible? Am I going to spend 6 months doing this project or 18 months doing this project? Because
Ben, to what extent do people start out at a sort of macro level and say, here are the 10 problems that I'm trying to solve, or here are the 10 risks that I'm managing, and to what extent do they go in at a more micro level? Is there a sort of split between, I've already got my processes and these are the problems that they're solving, and therefore, can you show me how I go along this road that I'm already driving down? Or, are people going in with a bit more of a blank sheet of paper and saying, you guys are the experts, show me how to do it?
Yeah, again, it is a mix. I think that you usually find some correlation between the size of the organization, maybe the team size as well, and actually how that fits into what you just mentioned. I think larger organizations will have much more established processes and controls, and want to, they'll have their requirements at a lot more of a detailed level, and they'll say, can you do this or can you not do this? And that usually is in the form of an RFP, and then it progresses down. We usually find we're being a bit more consultative in those smaller organizations where you might have just 1 or 2 people in Treasury. And obviously, as Naresh alluded to, they're just more focused on keeping the wheels turning. So they require us maybe to have some input as to how we can help and how we can maybe add some areas as to what they might have missed. So I think it's a definite variation.
Thank you for that,
If I
James.
may
Ben,
add to that, Peter. Can I add
just a
something to
second.
that? Yes.
Chris, I'll come back to you in just a moment. Ben, I just want to follow up on one extra point there. And you're getting to an interesting point there in terms of when you're looking at that organisation, that maybe that medium size one, and they've got that sort of, they're coming to you for that sort of advice. Do you also have them coming to you now, after perhaps they've become clients, and saying, I wish I'd done it this way, or I wish I'd done something different? What can you do for me?
Yeah, we do see that. I think it depends very much on, where they are and using the product. And we often see, for example, payments is a big one. Payments is obviously depending on your organization size, maybe your banking structure, the amount of payments you're doing globally, countries you're in. That is obviously a big project. And clients often come to us with the short-term view, maybe of the cash management visibility side of things in there. And then they'll come back to us in maybe 6 months' time and say, look, we're having these issues, or this is how we're doing payments, this is how long it's taking us. Can you help us with that? We do see it, definitely. We try and be as sort of ample as possible to changes. We are definitely open to trying to work with clients and helping them put new solutions in. But yeah, we do see it. I think, again, it depends on how much of a granular look have they done at the start. And I think you often find if a treasury management system is approved, then they have looked at pretty much every area and they have turned over most stones. So it's not as common, but we do see it.
Thank you. Chris, I'll have you come in just a moment. I'd like to ask, if I may, the tech guys to put up the second polling question that we have, and that'll come up in a moment. Chris, you were going to make a comment. Please go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to add, especially when you have these medium-sized companies that might not have that much of a best practice treasury experience, especially, and they go out just to their vendor to ask, can you help us? What I've seen, unfortunately, a few times is that when it comes to implementation of a treasury system, the treasury system is very eager to get implementation done as soon as possible. Tick the box, sign the documents, and get out of there. It's not all of them, but it's some of them, and therefore it's a little bit of promotion for the consultants here. That if you have somebody to assist you, to actually that has seen several systems, has seen an implementation of the same system before, knows what it can do, it can really drive those discussions with your supplier. To make sure that what they promise is really possible, and to ensure that they really give you the best possible capabilities of the system.
That's a good point. Naresh, just to bring you in on here, I'm going to ask you an unfair question. Do you think there is value in ignorance, or is all the value in experience when it comes to tech and treasury?
Well, having done 32 years as a treasurer, I definitely value experience over ignorance. If nothing else, at least knowing what you don't know.
Yes,
and I
suppose that's.
Please
go ahead.
Sort of picking up on Chris and sort of drawing on what Ben said. I think part of this is about not looking at the TMS as being a single implementation event. I hate that sort of that word of roadmap, but I really think that organizations need to think about where they want to be in sort of 5 or 10 years, and whatever technology solution is a key component of that. And it may be that what their first stage is moving, simplifying, standardizing processes, using Excel better before they actually move into investing time and money into a TMS. I think I still see many CFOs who think that a TMS is a silver bullet, fixes everything. Mm-hmm. I think most of us who've ever tried to put in a TMS will know it's not a silver bullet. It's, we've said it many times before, it's only as good as many things, including the people implementing it and people using it. So I think there's a lot of expectation gaps around the way in which we use TMSs, the way they're sold to us by the vendors, the way in which the consultants encourage us to believe we'll get real value out of it.
Thank you for that. As we can see from the poll answers there, the good news, perhaps certainly I would consider it to be good news, is that the large majority, almost 3/4 of the folks who've got a TMS and Treasury tech, someone inside the Treasury team is looking after it. They don't seem to rely upon their IT teams at all, although I suspect that's probably not quite right. Somebody has to make sure the stuff works and that the corporate IT fits in, but maybe they don't consider that quite so important. And then we've got the system provider obviously being important in terms of updates and so on, and then a systems or an IT consultant. Just as soon as I say that, they say somebody in the IT department does get involved, but and then it goes again. The broad majority would seem to be someone in the Treasury team. We're getting towards the end here, so just to remind everybody, if you have any last questions you want to put them through, I can pick them up here. But I'm going to ask my panelists something I asked them to do a little prep on beforehand. If there's 2 or 3 things that treasurers should be asking themselves about the Treasury, about Treasury systems, and about how they're integrated into the Treasury in the future, and what they think. James, perhaps you'd like to kick us off with that, and I'll add a one specific one to you. There was an interesting point there raised about 5 or 10 years down the road. Is it your responsibility to make sure that the next treasurer along the rank in your job thinks and says, well, James did a good job, or is it not your problem?
I think it's partly my problem and partly not my problem. So I think, as we've touched on, there are a variety of technologies and integrations around that could well take off in the coming years. So you've got APIs, you've got Swift GPI, you've got blockchain. There's a whole variety of things that could come down the line, and you would want to be in a position where you're working with a vendor who will hopefully adopt the right technologies. Some of these things are difficult. So, for example, we put Swift in 2 years ago. We're on a multi-year contract. Otherwise, I have to go back to my CapEx committee and explain why that the great investment that I made in Swift was not necessarily the right one. So I think while something like APIs would be quite interesting, I think I'd have trouble making that call at the moment. So I think it's one of those things. I think you try and make sure that you're working with someone who's going to help you adopt the right technologies. I think most treasurers are in a position where you want to look at what's working. You don't necessarily always want to be the first in line, but I think that integration piece becomes more and more important. A lot of our treasury technology, we don't think twice about those integrations. So our dealing platforms talk to our ERPs and they talk to our TMSs. Similarly, our confirmation systems and all those other things. And I think having a TMS that ultimately is going to be an aggregator of data from a wide variety of sources, it's really important to have a team that you're working with who understand how that data might be coming in, who are willing to help you curate it so that it works in the database. If you think back 10 years, the number of times you'd have a bank statement coming in and you'd then spend a week and a half or something getting the thing configured so that the TMS could actually read it. We're getting to a position more and more where it's a plug and play, and I think that that becomes super important, because I think that what we are seeing is that the idea of one global bank and try and keep things as simple as possible and everything else, while they're lovely ideas in theory, the reality is that life's a bit messier than that. And so having someone who's going to be prepared to roll with the punches with you is important.
All right, thank you, James. Chris, a couple of things you think that treasurers really should have up front and center when they're thinking about their tech and their treasury systems?
Yeah, I think when they're looking at that system, I think that James already mentioned a lot of them. It's all about the data. not so much getting the data in your system, but what do you do with it? So really make sure that you have the platform to actually create good management reports out of that. So that's the integration with a Power BI or whatever kind of data management system. And of course, you will need to have the people for that as well. Yeah, to manage this additional technical skill, and as James has already, we're becoming more fragmented. There's no longer one bank, there's no longer one treasury system. It's going to be more specialized, and therefore the security risk, IT security risks, is going to become also a big issue going forward.
Right, thank you. Ben, any closing comments from you on this point?
Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of what James said. I think the importance come in a thorough selection process. I think that not only do you have to have your requirements under control and understand what you want the TMS to do and what is actually in the realms of possibility, but it's also very important that you actually choose a provider that you trust and that is actually willing to kind of work with you as, maybe that's a bit cliche, but as that partner. There's no point in choosing a provider that's just going to implement, as Chris said, sign off and then run off into the distance with all of your cash each month. So I would say that someone that is willing to work with you from the outset, showing some willingness in terms of development during the implementation process, and then building that trust, so that if there is a new development that comes out or a new regulation that comes out, that if you make a request, you're not going to be put to the back of the queue or just told no straight away. I think that's a very important point.
Okay, thank you for that. Naresh, anything from your perspective and what you're hearing at the moment from treasurers about what they're liking or not liking about their current treasury tech?
No, I think
apart from LIBOR, of course.
I think a lot of them have been really pleased about the ability to continue their operations. And I think it's really important to use the things like cloud technology, being able to operate more disparately. The one thing I would add is, and this is, I think, a challenge I feel really good. Client of mine at PwC, they limited how many Excel spreadsheets their teams across their business can actually operate as business critical. And I think it's really part of pushing and using the systems as much as possible. So my challenge for treasurers out there using a system, whether it's new or old, is to really look at how you're using spreadsheets and trying to move off them and limiting your team's use of these for really critical matters.
Yeah. And do you think that's a message that is shared across business and across our financial colleagues, whether in tax or accounting or procurement or wherever it may happen to be? Or is this an area where you think Treasury could actually give some leadership?
I think we could genuinely provide some leadership. I know it's a real issue for internal audit, internal controls, the proliferation of Excel spreadsheets. And I think the more we can do, we're here to manage external risks. We're also here to manage internal risks and make sure we run tight control environments. And I think using lots of spreadsheets is really not a good example of a focus on operating controls.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to all my panelists today. Thank you to all those of you who are out there listening, and to those of you who are going to be listening to this presentation. Please do fill out the feedback survey, which can be found next to your Q&A button. You've got an opportunity to listen to this again or to pass it on to colleagues through the portal because it's been recorded. There are other sessions available both today and later in the week. Do join us on social media, particularly at ACT Update, hashtag ACTFTT, and do please keep abreast of the other things during this Festival of Treasury Transformation. Thank you very much. Good day.